So hopefully you can all see that, just if you can confirm. Good.
We can.
This is the Wesley Place project. It's a project undertaken by COX Architects and Lovell Chen. Lovell Chen being responsible for the conservation works that occurred in the place. It's a project that we've had a very long association with. I look back in our files. We started in 1993 dealing with Parrot Lyon Matheson when they were advising the Wesley Church. It's a site that comprises a series of buildings, the church being the centerpiece, and then a series of additional educational buildings built in the 1850s, the Manse and Schoolhouse, and a caretaker's cottage built later in the 20th century, and an accommodation for women built in the Princess Mary Club in the 1920s. The site we looked at in the 1990s, early 2000s, we identified areas of significance, and the church, the schoolhouse up on the top right, and the manse on the centre left were the original Joseph Reed buildings in a terrible state when we started. There were some trees in the rear, an olive tree and a couple of elm trees, and then buildings of contributory significance. So it was the subject of a conservation management plan. The church, as it was in the 1870s, the schoolhouse on the left, manse tucked in beside the spire there, you can just see. Princess Mary Club was an acquired piece of land. It was a building built for church purposes and built of reinforced concrete, and over the years deteriorated very badly. They had major problems with reinforcing corrosion, and was ultimately demolished to make way for this site. The site, when we started, was in a dire state. It was used basically as a car park for the church. The Wesley Church had a congregation of about 30 people, and the Wesley Central Mission was occupied in a modern building on the frontage on Lonsdale Street on the left. It was a site that for many years the church didn't know what to do with. The buildings themselves, basically variable condition. Peter Staunton, a well-known conservation architect, undertook salvage and repair works in the 1960s, and during those works stripped the entire spire of all its detailing. It was originally a very heavily detailed spire. It was clad in copper at that time, sadly. The schoolhouse, the manse, was used as a sort of publishing house in poor condition, and the cars, as you can see, parked around it. The schoolhouse was used for the helpline services run by the church and the mission. And the caretaker's cottage at the rear was falling apart. It's a cavity brick construction with brick ties that had corroded through, and the skins and brickwork were falling apart. The site commenced with a major archaeological piece of work, which was in itself an extraordinary process, because we discovered that the whole area had been filled by about 3 meters. It was in fact a gully, and the remains of a whole series of cottages were found underneath. So the site began in a conservation sense. Works began with a very detailed archaeological investigation. That's the evidence of the original terrace on the site. I might hand to Audrey Ong, who was the principal project architect, to talk a bit now about the actual works. And Audrey, hopefully you're there. If she's not, I'm not sure what's happening. She isn't connected, so I will keep talking. Audrey, if you're there, jump in. She's in a separate room, so I'm not sure where she is. The works in terms of the conservation works, in a sense, a conventional package, but also not. The buildings are a palimpsest. They've had many, many changes over the years, so that conventional works like slating roofs, dealing with rainwater, etc., were all, in a sense, straightforward conservation. What changed here was that we had a whole series of a layer of compliance works and a layer of failed detailing, so that there was a lot of modification and refinement of things like church roof drainage, which had leaked for literally 100 years, to come up with solutions that address not only the conservation imperative, but also the functional imperative. We discovered elements that we were able to reproduce. Original rain heads, etc., were cast. We relined outlets and essentially looked at both, if you like, restore, reconstruct, but also needing to adapt some of the detailing. The schoolhouse, we had lost much of the detailing, so photographic imagery was used. to enable reconstruction. In the stonework, the building, as I say, had been changed many times. In the 1930s, a lot of the original Tasmanian stone had been removed and replaced with render. In the 60s, the spire was stripped, and this is the general state. So that the sandstone conservation was a very meticulous process of sampling analysis, of mock-ups, of recarving in a very selected way. The budget did not go to a wholesale conservation. It was very directed conservation, and so that this work was very particular. A lot of analysis and testing of materials. It was a very rigorous process as a conservation process, and a very sort of by-the-book borough charter process. As I say, this is precast material put in the 30s to replace the original sandstone rather than carving sandstone, which we couldn't afford. We in fact reconstructed the recast material, the cast stone material, as it were, so that the building remains this layered building, which is very much part of its conservation state, if you will, its heritage state. The lead light windows, fairly conventional cleaning, restoring of stained glass. Tracery, a mixture though of stone and cast material. So this challenge of materials that operated in a different dynamic in the way they performed. And so again, an interesting issue in dealing with how to manage that into the future. The major challenge we had with two of the buildings was seismic response to seismic compliance requirements. We had to insert portal frames. We had to do gridded pinning to hold the manse together. The rubble bluestone wall wasn't considered to comply in any way. And so that there was major work to both hold original fabric where we could, insert where we had to, and undertake detailed seismic retrofitting to address compliance. And this, one of the issues we had was this is a site where we had a 50% trigger under the NCC for compliance, so we really had no choice. We certainly had a building surveyor who assisted us, but still things like the stair on the left, we literally had to adjust the entire, every single tread had to be modified to deal with the fact that it was up to 5 mils out, so that the building surveyor, as the only stair in the building, would not accept a non-compliant stair. Usual issues of increasing handrail heights, that sort of thing. So it was very meticulous in that way that we had these very particular issues. The final product was, is one which I think has within a budget retrieved, restored, conserved. And Simon isn't talking today, and then COX have come in and done this major bit of adaptation, new build around it. And it has rediscovered, it's refound for Melbourne, this extraordinary complex of buildings, which is really primarily significant as a very rare early church complex with these very distinctive buildings, which now in many respects have been again retrieved from a derelict state, revealed. As I say, this was a budget constrained job. This was not just go in and spend money, and in some ways that's very good. And so it's been very considered. The olive tree, out of interest, was pulled out of the ground many years ago and moved in an earlier stage of this project. It was kept this time where it was and is absolutely flourishing. It's one of the oldest trees in Melbourne. The Caretaker's Cottage, again, restored and conserved. So I think that's really, these are just details of the work. It is a very painstaking and very directed piece of conservation work that has occurred. So thank you.